Hello, everyone. Welcome to Briar Haus Writes. I'm Becky Parker, and today it is my distinct honor to be able to welcome back Michael Keith with us today. Michael, as you know, is the author of an acclaimed memoir, The Next Better Place, which is also a young adult novel, Life is Falling Sideways, and 27 collections, as well as being the groundbreaking writer for several books in the world of radio studies. He is also known for microflash fiction called Pink, for which he invented. And today he's here to talk to us about, amongst other things, his wonderful new children's book. Michael, welcome to our program.
Thanks, Becky. It's great to be back here again with you.
Thank you so much for coming back. Michael, you are now the author of a children's story called Mig's Magic Marble. Can you
Yeah,
elaborate how this book came about?
yeah, I'd love to. Uh, this is this is the book. I hope you can see it, uh, and it just came out about a week ago. It just published about a week ago, and how it came about was it actually was written over 30 years ago. And my I I happened to be at a library and I picked up an old Look magazine. They have these wonderful black and white photos, and it was in the 1930s. And I saw a photo of kids playing marbles. And I thought, oh, that's interesting because when I was a kid, decades later, I played marbles too. So on my way home, I thought of the story, and the whole story just popped into my head. Up until that point, I'd only published academic books, and I hadn't even published my memoir at that point. And by the time I got home, the whole story was in my head. I sat down at the computer and I wrote up the story. And then when my wife got home, she was a an illustrator, and for many years she was an illustrator at Hasbro Toys. As a matter of fact, she was the principal designer for My Little Pony, the toy, right? So I said, "Oh, I did this," and she said, "You wrote a children's story?" I said, "Yeah, read it and let me know what you think, and maybe you might consider illustrating it." She read it, she liked it, and she said, "Yeah, I'll illustrate it." So she illustrated it, and then I came up with like four or five other children's stories, and she started illustrating those. And then when we had a handful, I thought, let me see if we can get it published. And I shopped around and I discovered that a lot of the children's books publishers didn't want a completed book. They would like the story, but they had their own in-house artists or freelance artists, and no matter how great the illustrations were, and my no one could have done a better job than my wife. That was their policy, and so we kind of gave up on the idea. And I was at Boston College, involved in all of that, and Suzanne was back at Hasbro, and we forgot about it. And lo and behold, uh, about 4 weeks ago, we had a blizzard here, and one morning I came down to my office here, and I looked at the curtains, and there was a big stain on one of the curtains, and I thought, "What's that?" I went over and I opened the curtains, and at the top of the window frame were beads of water. It was leaking. The roof was leaking, and I followed the path of the leak right down to the floor. And right next to a file cabinet were four large manila envelopes, and the water was reaching them. And then it dawned on me, oh my God, those are the illustrations for our children's books. And I lifted them up very quickly, took them to the kitchen table, opened them up, and fortunately, none of them had been touched by water. But I found Mig's Magic Marble. The illustrations were there, and we had created a mock book. Not this is the finished product, of course, but we did a mock book with the storyline and everything. And I thought, it was coming up to the 1 year anniversary of my wife's passing. And I thought, I have got to try to get this published as a memorial, a dedication to her, because her illustrations are so wonderful. But then I remembered how hard it was. So I thought, I don't care if I have to self-publish it myself. I don't care. This is for her, right? So I started asking some of my friends who had actually self-published, how did you do it? How did you do it? And then I thought, let me ask one of my publishers, because they see to it that their books are published, and maybe I can get some advice. So I contacted one who had published 2 or 3 of my books, and I said, to him, I sent him some of the illustrations in the story, and I said, I'm going to try to get this published. Can you tell me how you go about it? And he said, I read the story and I looked at the illustration. It's wonderful. Would you allow me to publish it? And I was like, oh my God, a small commercial press, they'll publish it. And it was the answer to my prayers. And he did a beautiful job on it. But a
Who
month
is the
ago,
publisher?
Scantic Press, Scantic Books. I'm sorry, I always get that wrong. Scantic Books, right? And he's published, but he'd only published novels, and he'd only published short story collections. That I said, you're going to publish this? He said, you know what? I taught children's literature for many years. I know about this. And I went, it's a divine intervention. The snowstorm, the ice dam, and boom, and that was the story. And now it's published, and it's on Amazon, and people are contacting me saying how much they love it. And so it was just, it was a wonderful experience, because it was a gloomy time for me, a year anniversary of my wife passing, and then to have this realized for her, it was just wonderful.
And
So
to
that's
have her
how.
name listed as the illustrator.
Well, oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. I don't know if you can see. I said to the publisher, I said, look, I want her name listed first, illustrated by and written by. I know traditionally it's written by, illustrated by, but I want her name first. And I want her biography in there with her photo. And I don't want my biography in there. And I don't want my photo in there at all. And he contacted me and said, Michael, he said, your name's on it as the writer. I really can't publish a book and ignore the person who wrote it. So I'll put your biography in there, but I'll put it under hers. And I'd like to have a photo of maybe the two of you. So I found this
Oh,
photo, which was around the time that this was written, 25 years ago. It just all
it
worked
came
out
together.
so, it just came together, uh, just like a dream.
It took 30 years, Michael, for that
It
dream to
took
come about. So, what advice would you give to others who maybe they have written a children's book, but they really don't know how to turn?
Yeah. First of all, I would say if they've written just the text and they really believe in the story, yeah, submit it to children's book publishers, because that's really all they're looking for. Because they're going to read your story, and they're going, if they like it, they're going to decide on the kind of illustrations that should go in it. Whereas we already had it done, that was actually against us. We thought that would be to our benefit. The book is finished. All you have to do is publish it. So
Right.
I would say, if your viewers have written children's stories and they really believe in them, get it out there. And then if the worst comes to the worst and they can't get it commercially published and they believe in it, uh, you know, they should look for illustrators, professional illustrators, and then perhaps self-publish it. You
Mm,
know,
that's very good advice. So, because you've written in several genres, what do you look for in inspiration when you are writing?
uh, that's a complex question because I've written in 4 different genres. All
Right.
right. I began by writing academics, right? And I started off writing a textbook because I was teaching a course called radio operations. And the textbook that I had to use was just very dated. It was almost not relevant to the reality of the radio industry today. I had been in radio for 12 years in every department, and I thought, no, this isn't right. Let me write my own textbook. So I did. I wrote the radio station, and I sent it into a publisher, and and they liked it, and they published it, and it became their best-selling book, and it became the most widely adopted textbook on the subject in America, and then globally it was used from Indonesia to Russia, you know. So that was the inspiration. The inspiration behind writing that textbook was, if you're an academic, it's publish or perish anyway, so you need to be productive. And at the time I was teaching at a junior college, and I only had my master's, and I thought I need to do something to lift me out of here, and it really did. It was the golden key to the golden kingdom. That book really was. I thought about writing a memoir of my young life, uh, from the age of 5 to 17. I was on the road with my alcoholic father, hitchhiking across the country, right? And it was a bizarre life. And everybody would say, "Oh my God, you really, really have to write about this." And then I finally decided, after writing all of these academic books, yeah, let me try that. And I had read Frank McCourt's Angela's Ashes, and that book inspired me. But then I wrote the book. It took for 2 years. I tried to get a publisher, nothing worked. Then I tried to get an agent, nothing worked. And then one day I was walking through the Boston College Library, and it occurred to me that the book, as it was written, had a prologue and an epilogue, but the whole book was in the middle. And I didn't need the prologue and the epilogue. And I went home and I disposed of those, and I had the solitary work. And then a dear friend of mine who I'd grown up with told me that he had an agent. And I said, "Oh, you do? I have this book. Would you mind if I referenced your name and contacted them?" And he says, "No, please do." And I contacted the agency, and I attached the manuscript to it, and they contacted me, and they said, "Yeah, we'll be happy to read it and happy to consider it." And I was so happy I got an agent, right? And then weeks and weeks went by, and I didn't hear from them, and I thought, what's going on?
Right.
And I was kind of perturbed, and I called him up perturbed, and I said, "Let me talk to the acquisitions agent there." And the day I called up, she said, "Oh, we love your book. We want to represent you." And I was like, "Why didn't you tell me that?" She said, "You won't believe this, but today we were going to call you." You know,
Isn't that wild?
isn't that wild? So weeks went by, and what agents do, and this might be interesting for your viewers, is they send books out in batches, to 4 agents at a time, and they give each agent a time limit to respond, say 21 days. And after the 21 days, they withdraw it. And that's to get the agent or the publisher off their butts, right? And so they kept getting letters back saying, "We love the book, but it's not for us," or "We have other books and memoirs, and we're not. And she sent me the letters, and I saw these mounting letters of rejection. In fact, at one point she said, "You have the best rejection letters we've ever seen." I said, "Oh, thank you. That and $3 will get me a coffee at Dunkin' Donuts," right? And so I was beginning to give up hope, and I thought, look, I've done everything, and I got to be satisfied. I've tried everything. I will go, and this was at the time before Staples. I'll go to Kinko's, and I'll just make 4 copies of it to give to my family, because they don't know the story. and my friends, right? And I was about to do that, and the agent called up and she says, "We have a nibble." I said, "What?" She says, "Yes, we have an inquiry. It's not the biggest publisher in the world, but it is one of the most prestigious publishers. It's Algonquin Books." And at that precise time, they had the number one book on the New York Times bestseller list, Water for Elephants.
Oh, yeah.
And I was elated. And so she said, the Algonquin wants you to call them. Call them. Call. So I called them up, and the the primary editor, Amy Gash, said right off the bat, she says, "I love your book." And I went, "Oh, that's good." And then she said, "But I have one concern." And I thought, well, there goes this, right? And she said, "It doesn't have a hook. You need a hook in the last third of the book to keep the readers reading." And as she said that, the idea for the hook popped into my head. Before the phone call was over, I knew where it would go. And she said, "So give me, when you do it, get back in touch with me, right?" And I got off the phone, and within a half an hour, I wrote the hook. I knew where to put it. It was in the book. It was done. But I thought, you can't call her right back. That's going to seem fishy to her. So this was on a Friday. I waited to Monday, and I sent it to her. And by Tuesday, she said, "That's perfect. We'll call your agent and contract it." Boom. And that was the best publishing experience of my life, I think, besides publishing the radio station, which became the book in the field. And
What do you find to be things that draw you in to want to write about? Because you have written so many things. So what are you
yeah,
drawn to?
well, I think I'm drawn to just seeing a book published. I love publishing. I love seeing what ideas I have in my head come to fruition between covers. It's very seductive to me. Plus, I always have ideas. I'm always thinking of scenarios, always. I'm plagued by that almost. So it's a good outlet for that. And then I just go to work, and then after I did the memoir, I began writing fiction,
Hmm.
and I wrote a young adult novel, Life is Falling Sideways, and that was published by Minuscule Press. And then I started writing short stories, which I would send to webzines, you know and then the webzines, a lot of them had annual anthologies where they'd put the best of stories in it, and I was in a dozen or more of those. And then I thought, the stories you write, maybe you should keep until you have a collection, and try to get the collection published. And 33 collections later, published, that's where I am. Okay, so after spending the last 15 years really producing so many short story volumes, all of a sudden I realized that I'd published over 30. This is the 34th, and it's, you could say it's almost like a hobby. I mean, I enjoy doing it. It occupies my time. It distracts me, which in the last year I've really needed that. And I belong to a couple of writers groups, and one is called O'Hara's, and the other is called Bagel Bards. O'Hara's are good friends of mine and really outstanding writers. So we feed off of one another, and they've published multiple books. And I think you've had them on your program. I know you have. So that's what kind of keeps me going, and I think that's what keeps them going too.
Well, I wanted to ask you about your website because it does, really draw you in. Do you recommend that every author or writer has a website?
Yeah, I think it's almost necessary. Uh, Almost every publisher I've dealt with assumes that the author has a website, because it becomes becomes a promotional device, a marketing device. And when they publish a book, they want you to do social media, and posting your book on your website is a tool for social media, and it's also a tool for interviews and whatnot, and it's also a tool for presses to see what you've done. They do their due diligence too. If you send a manuscript into them, they want to know, what else have you done? So oftentimes a well assembled website will help sell your manuscript to the press. They can see, oh, this person's done a dozen or 2 dozen books. This person is a solid writer.
Mhm.
And so I think that's very fun. And as a matter of fact, I think one of the people you had on your program, I think, was Phil Temples.
Yes.
Yes, he designed my website, and he's wonderful, and he's designed other people's websites. And so he's great, because whenever I have something new, he just pops it on there instantly, and you can access any one of my books on my website by just hitting it, and it takes you right to Amazon.com. you know
Wow.
so so he's a real asset, and he just published his 8th or 10th book, as a matter of fact,
And he
just
has a
this week.
university background as well.
He was a systems manager in the computer department at Boston College.
Hmm.
That's how we met about 15 years ago. The maintenance guy, we're the computer department and the communication department were on the same floor. And so the maintenance guy said, there's another writer over across the hall in the computer. You guys should get together. Boom, we did, and we've become like best friends ever since.
When you are writing a manuscript or a book, how do you know how many chapters to put in that book, and what publishers are actually looking for, like the length of it? How do you
Yeah.
know?
Okay. I've been writing, my last half dozen books are microfiction, short little pieces. In fact, I've entered the realm of micro poetry. So when I get to about 150 pages, each one with a micro piece on it, then I begin to think, okay, this is a good length for micro fiction and micro poetry. You don't
Right.
want something that's 300 pages of micro fiction. So then I get to that point, and then I began prospecting for publishers. Now, I've had a lot of different publishers, so a lot of times I'll just go back to them.
Right.
uh, or I go on Duotrope. I don't know if you're familiar with
Hmm.
Duotrope, and they list a lot of publishers. Or I go on pw.org, which is Publishers Weekly, which lists in the genre you're working in. I go to them and break it down. So that's really how I locate presses for my work.
And when you are sending out your scripts,
Uh-huh.
how do you deal with knowing, okay, so it's been 2 weeks, I haven't heard back? Do you move on
Okay.
to someone else, or do you just stay put and say, I'm
No,
going to wait for them?
no, I simultaneously submit multiple manuscripts. The idea of submitting a manuscript to a publisher that says no simultaneous submissions, and that takes them 6 months to get back to you, is ridiculous. I won't do that. So I'll send out 6, 8 manuscripts at a time, and then I'll wait a few weeks, and then if I haven't gotten any responses back, I'll load up again and send more out. So it's kind of law of average, but the
Hmm.
more you send out, the greater your chance of hearing from someone.
And how are you keeping track of the ones that you are sending out and the ones that you don't hear from? What's your method?
Yeah. Well, like Phil, who's very organized, you can keep track of it on Duotrope. You can have your own page, and you can list, keep track of them. I just write them down, each one down, and
Hmm.
the date that it was sent. And then if it's been 2 months, I know it. And then I think, generally speaking, if it goes a couple of months, you're not going to hear from them. You're not going to, and then if it takes them 5 months to get back to you, don't deal with them. because it's going to take them 2 years to do your book. Except there are exceptions to that. A friend of mine, Greg Wolos, who I think you also had on, uh, he he waited like 2 years and was about to delete it, and then he thought, oh, let me just tap them again. And as soon as he did, they said, oh, we love your book, we want to publish it. So you
Well,
never know.
well, I did hear that the average for getting a book published is approximately 2 years. So that, it's just patience is a virtue, but it's also hard.
Yeah, I don't know that it's that much of a virtue. If you have to wait that long, it's your life. You just
Yes, and
spent 2 years waiting for one book. You could have published four other books during that time. This book, which was published by Silver Bow Publishing, it took them from the time they accepted it to this book less than 5 weeks.
wow.
And the book was published in a beautiful job, and it's up on Amazon.
Well,
So
Michael, you've given us so much food for thought today. I am so thankful that you were able to meet with me. And I
I
wish
am,
you all the best in all your future endeavors. I can't wait to see what next items you're going to come up with.
yes. Well,